Hello, my name is Silvia Damiano, and I want to welcome you to this session. We will be talking about the power of feedback on a leader's brain and how we can turn something that could be scary for some into our best friend. You see, feedback can be confronted at times because it challenges the way we see ourselves, but it can also be very helpful when we have to develop ourselves as human beings. I also want to highlight why it is important that any consultant or coach who works in the leadership development field is confident to discuss the topic of feedback when it's time to have a program design conversation with clients. This presentation stems from the questions that many people ask me. I have chosen 4 key questions, and I trust the answers will provide some useful insights. When putting together a leadership development program, it's pretty common to include a 360 feedback assessment instrument. The first question that I get asked quite frequently is, can I use a self-assessment or a personality test instead of a 360 in a leadership program? Even though there is nothing wrong with using a self-assessment, it's like comparing pears and apples. It is important to understand the difference between what it means to learn something about myself from actually learning how I cannot come across to others and being able to pinpoint what I need to change to lead more effectively. Until today, I haven't found one single author or researcher on the topic of leadership that will affirm 100% that a person with a particular personality type doesn't have the capacity to lead others. There might be personalities more inclined to be in a leadership position, but personality alone doesn't preclude people from doing so. Therefore, a self-assessment that indicates our preferences, values, styles, personality, or any other traits, in my view, is not the most effective leadership development tool that you can use. Having said this, I personally like to use self-assessments in combination with 360s if the program is long enough, if there is sufficient budget, or if there's anything specific that a self-assessment can provide to enhance the learning experience. A self-assessment can also help people reflect before the program and in a way prepare them for what they are about to undertake. To give you an example of something totally different, if I ask you, how did you sleep last night? You may say, I slept fine, or I didn't have a good night's sleep, or you may say, I have no idea, and I didn't even think about it until you asked me. My question could help you think about your sleep in the same way that a self-assessment could help you think about yourself in more depth. But that's all there is to it. This doesn't mean you cannot use one if the situation requires it, but it's not the same effect that a 360 feedback assessment can have on a person. Now, this is totally different to getting feedback from the person sleeping next to you, which brings us to the second question. Why is feedback useful? Let's go back to the sleeping example. You may be thinking, I slept fine, but the person next to you noticed that you have gasped for air while you were sleeping, or you snored, or you moved a lot and even talked while you were sleeping. All possible indications that the quality of your sleep may not be the best. One interesting fact that comes to mind is that most people will deny that they snore when they are told they do so, or they may simply don't believe their partners. There is something that our brains do when it comes to criticism of any sort. It likes to protect itself. Now, if you wanted to be more specific and prove your point, you would use one of the many available devices to confirm the sleeping pattern or ask your partner to get a sleep study in a hospital. What is still intriguing to me is that if we were working with athletes, nobody would even question the concept of feedback. From a very basic point of view, coaches can see their athletes in action and may see areas that need improving that are not apparent to the athlete. Feedback allows coaches to tell them how they are performing in relation to their expectation, and this practice of feedback not only can improve their performance, but can also reinforce the skills that the athlete has already learned. We don't treat ourselves the same in our jobs. With the exception of those companies that have already embraced a culture of feedback, many leaders seem to resist the notion of giving or seeking feedback. Most of the time, it's because they don't have the skill or they have not even thought about it. Which brings me to the third question. This is, do we really have to include a 360 feedback assessment in our upcoming talent program? When leaders resist the idea of doing a 360 assessment, they may influence or discourage the HR team who are in charge of developing the talent of the organization. And if HR doesn't have a strong voice at the executive team level, any leadership initiative might fall through the cracks or become a wishy-washy program with no impact. They may say things like, we have done this before, we don't need to do it again. People are experiencing survey fatigue. We have our own 360. Can we just run a leadership development program without any assessment? Why can't just people be honest with each other and say it as it is? Let me address each of these points quickly. We have done this before. We don't need to do it again. An organization, a team, or a person is a living organism. People can go, and each interaction is unique. In addition, our brain changes constantly based on the experiences we are having. As a group of people changes, as the environment changes, and as time passes by, we may react or respond differently to situations. That is why doing a 360 on an annual basis is a good opportunity to revisit how we are perceived by others, and if that perception differs or not to how we see ourselves. Number 2, people are experiencing survey fatigue. This one drives me a bit crazy, to be honest. The time to complete an assessment is usually 15 to 30 minutes at the most. And yes, if you have to assess others, it could add a couple of hours to your workload. However, let's keep in mind that this is usually done as a paid exercise in working hours. When participants complain, I have found that some HR people lack the conviction or the patience to explain to participants why getting feedback is important. I don't think there is anything that justifies people not participating in a program that is being offered for their own development and the company's advancement. If you think education is expensive, try ignorance. It's the only thing that comes to mind when I hear this complaint. However, as a HR professional, it is important to ensure that the outcomes of the feedback exercise or the program that is being offered is meaningful, useful, and worth people's time. I have seen consultants putting programs together that simply are not good enough. They are boring, poor in content, nothing experiential, and feedback is not treated with care. So this may end up hurting people instead of developing them. Number 3, we have our own 360, which usually doesn't work as it is not statistically sound. When organizations say they have a 360, we need to understand the difference between these 360s and a properly validated instrument that responds to a particular model that is well researched. A 360 can be a bunch of questions put together to check on how people are doing at work. If it's developed in-house, there's always going to be a reticence from staff because they know that HR and senior management can have access to this data. Consequently, people are not necessarily so open to respond in an honest manner, or they use the qualitative questions at the end to say the things they never dare to say face-to-face. This has the potential of affecting people in their self-esteem and confidence. The quality of the questions is key to a well-developed instrument. The questions have to be such that they work for people from any background, level of work, age, gender, etc. It takes significant time and research to come up with meaningful questions that people can view as relevant. So no, all 360s are not the same, even though they are referred to as 360s. Number 4, can we just run a leadership development program without any assessment? Yes, you can run a leadership development program without any assessment. In this case, you will be simply informing participants, but not transforming people. Good feedback delivered by an external debriefer or coach and using the right instrument can be completely transformational. If this is accompanied by the latest research on leadership, practical exercises, and a set of well-thought experiences, magic can happen for a person or for a team. After 25 years of doing this, I have seen incredible transformations that last forever. How do I know? I still receive emails from people that I have trained 5, 10, or 15 years ago, and this is where I see the real return on investment. They tell me stories of how they had a light bulb moment that made them realize that what they were doing wasn't working, and they decided to change it. These light bulb moments happen in people's brains, and only then is when true behavioral change can take place. The brain adapts, and new neural connections are formed as we learn new things and have new life experiences. Feedback from others, even if it doesn't reflect the truth 100%, because if you think about it, we are only receiving the perception of others. However, it has the power to ignite a leader's brain or anyone's brain and move people into action. When it comes to the power of feedback to increase engagement, I was just reading a very interesting article by Forbes that makes an observation about the fact that requesting feedback is what boosts a leader's likelihood of having an engaged team. As the following figures show, while giving feedback still positively impacts employee engagement by about 5%, giving and asking for feedback more than doubles the percentile score of managers who only give feedback. This is truly amazing. Now, why can't people just be honest with each other and say it as it is? The reality is that it is hard to give feedback, and it seems that it's also hard to ask for feedback. Although it's possible to train ourselves to do this better, we know that in organizations where everyone is busy and people lack the skill of face-to-face feedback, the easiest way is to use a good 360 instrument to measure against a particular set of competencies that we want our leaders to have. There are many instruments that are well designed that evaluate things like emotional intelligence or a specific selected set of competencies. At About My Brain, we have developed a 360 feedback instrument that measures the competencies of performance, collaboration, innovation, and agility, and its 16 underpinning pillars. This instrument was developed taking into consideration the latest findings from neuroscience and not only helps the people who take it to become more aware of how they are doing things in regard to these competencies, but it also helps them develop personal leadership and mental well-being. The assessment is anonymous and it's designed for developmental purposes. Only the participant and the debriefer have access to the report, and the findings from this assessment can be used in a coaching or a training program with a specific focus to improve whatever the person decides they need to work on. This instrument comes with a comprehensive online course which makes up the i4 Neuroleader platform. Participants have 12 months access to the content, and if they want to renew their membership, they can complete a new 360 to compare with the previous one and verify if there has been any progress or not. Why is feedback critical to develop the brain of a leader? You may be wondering. Since the pandemic started, we have witnessed many people in leadership positions making all sorts of decisions in uncharted waters. These decisions have had a huge impact on millions of people, their health and their livelihoods. We are not yet out of the woods with COVID, and I always think that if political leaders would have been better prepared when it comes to their personal leadership, perhaps some of these decisions could have been better implemented. If you were a leader of a country or an organization, wouldn't you want to be the best you can be in that position? When it comes to leadership, we know that leaders can never please everyone with what they say and what they do. There will always be people who disagree what is being mandated, and the pandemic has made it obvious. It also happens at home, if you have kids, for those who are parents, or if you lead a team of people. Not everything we say is applauded and easily accepted. From my work with leaders, something to me is quite certain. If people were more open to seek feedback so they can calibrate themselves, there will be less tension and perhaps less conflict. But above all, the outcomes or the decisions will be more balanced and effective. Some leaders are simply unaware of this, and they believe that they can do most of the things they have to do on their own without bringing other people along in the journey. Leading people is a hard task, and it's even harder under the circumstances we have gone through since the start of the pandemic. One thing we now know from neuroscience is that if we give the brain feedback about something, the person receiving the feedback is more likely to adjust their thinking and actions. In organizations, we use feedback on leadership competencies, but it could be about anything: your sleep, the health of your gut microbiome, your heart rate variability, how well you're meditating, the type of brain waves you're producing. This is done using a neurofeedback tool. And all of this is invaluable information that allows us to understand what we need to do to make changes. We don't have to fly blind. All these techniques, tools, and devices exist to help us personally and professionally. So why not use them? I hope that today's session was of interest. I invite you to follow our brain-friendly channel and stay tuned for our upcoming live sessions. And if you're a coach or a leadership consultant, I encourage you to complete our Neuroleader Certification, which provides you with countless teaching resources that will support you when you have to deliver the Neuroleader program and the 360 feedback assessment. And remember that better brains create better leaders and workplaces. See you soon.